So we thought maybe you'd be asking yourself, why is Animal Farm Foundation, whose mission is to bring dogs and people together to end discrimination, doing a podcast on behavioral euthanasia, right, Regina? It's a little weird.
Yeah, we know some people may think it's weird, but we're on the heels of our discussions about the comments coming from Roger Heston at PetSmart Charities and the recent Humane Society conference where we were hearing things like the shelter is full of dogs no one wants. And we've addressed how ludicrous those statements are because we know that people want the dogs in shelters. They're being adopted out in droves to families who want them and who love them very much. But as we were addressing this, we realized that we need to also talk about why keeping or adopting out dangerous dogs is not okay.
Animal Farm Foundation is not no kill, and we're also not anti no kill because that sort of language pits people against each other and it really only hurts the dogs. We refuse to label or peg sheltering as one or the other. We have always taken the stance of seeing the individual, the human, the dog, and the situation.
And that is a future podcast, so stay tuned. But if you are a shelter and you are doing that right and not judging, we applaud you no matter the category you may put your organization in. But we really need to stop passing judgment and start working together with respect.
We know this. Sorry. We know this is a tough topic to hear and discuss, but transparency and honesty is very important to us, and it's how we move forward and improve. So sit back, grab a drink, and when you're done listening, let us know what you think.
And you'll probably need lots of drinks while listening to this episode. Hi, and welcome to The Individual Animal, a podcast about dogs, people, and discrimination. I am Regina, and that's Nikki.
Hi, how are you? Oh, I'm rusty. All right. Hi, I'm Nikki, and today on our podcast, we are going to be talking about behavioral euthanasia with our guest, Bernice Clifford, who you guys have all heard before. She's our Director of Behavior and Training at Animal Farm Foundation, as well as Trish McMillan, who is a certified professional dog trainer. Trish, can you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Sure. I run an animal behavior business here in North Carolina, and I work with dogs, cats, and horses, and I live on a little tiny farm with also goats and chickens, and there's just the 14 animals and me. But I see clients, I lecture nationally and internationally on various subjects, mostly sheltering, defensive handling, working with aggressive dogs, and I do some shelter consulting as well.
I think this is going to be a pretty controversial topic. I'm sure we're going to have people on both ends and people in the middle. I want to start out by just talking to you guys about your experiences with having to deal with behavioral euthanasia with the work that you do. And talk a little bit about some experiences that are very memorable to you on the topic. So, Trish, if you want to start, I know you have a couple stories for us today.
Yeah, when I first started in sheltering a little over 20 years ago, I was a volunteer. And at that point, I had been apprenticing as a dog trainer, and I think I knew the most I ever knew about dog training a couple years in. And since then, I've been realizing how little I know, and the universe has been slowly humbling me. But at the point where I knew the most that I'll ever know, I was pretty sure that I could fix any dog. As part of our apprenticeship, we had to take in foster dogs. So overachiever that I am, I took in 24 dogs in 24 months, and
Wow.
The shelter at the time didn't really have any programming, so I would just go in and say, who's the next one to be euthanized? They just waited till whoever had been there the longest got euthanized next. And I'd look into their little eyeballs through the cage and say, can I figure you out? And I brought them home. And indeed, I did figure quite a few of them out. And I was feeling pretty good about myself when mother came in with, well, actually, it was a pair of dogs who came in. They were a cruelty case. They were seized from a basement where the neighbors hadn't seen them outside since they were puppies. And they came in just emaciated and no hair from the shoulders on back. And the male was defecating in terror if you went in the cage with him. So they euthanized him for his own well-being.
Sure.
And they held on to the female, hoping to pin some cruelty charges on these people, which didn't happen. But she started getting fatter and she started making milk. And we realized, oh my God, she's pregnant. Most likely a sibling breeding, because they both looked very similar. Yes, dogs will do that. And it surprises some people. And I thought, wow, what a great opportunity as a baby trainer to take in a litter of puppies. I'm going to do everything right with these puppies. They are going to have all the socialization and the training, and I'm going to take them to my friend's place and meet her cat and have my friends with kids come over, and they're just going to see everything, and they're going to be the best puppies ever because I can fix anything. And I brought the mother dog home, and of course she's semi-feral and climbing the walls, and the puppies were born the night before I was able to get them. So one of them got stuck in the drain and died the first night. So there were 9 surviving puppies. And they were fat and happy. She was still pretty bald and skinny. And so I spent some time taming her and won her trust. And she let me handle these puppies. And I did everything according to plan, but one of them, even at 3 weeks of age, when I was just doing normal puppy handling, just turning him over, rubbing his belly, feeling his paws, he would growl. His eyes had just opened and he was already growling when you handled him. I thought, whoa, I've done everything right with these puppies. Why isn't he like the other puppies? So I kept him, adopted the rest out, and this puppy was abnormal from day one. Like even by a few weeks after the rest of the litter and the mom had been placed, he was coming out from under furniture and attacking my ankles because he had something under the chair with him. He was really hard to socialize because he'd just back away from everything. He was scared of strangers. He was scared of new situations. And he continued to have behavior issues. I remember having him in class, and he went after one of the other apprentices, so he got banned from class. We tried putting a gentle leader on him when he was 4 or 5 months old, and that was a rodeo. It was really extreme aggression around any kind of control of his mouth.
Oh.
So at 6 months of age, this was in the 90s, I found somebody willing to prescribe some meds to this dog. And of all the things I tried with him, the meds made the biggest difference. Because at that point, he was attacking me and or my boyfriend at the time up to 10 times a day. Like, it was just really low threshold. And when he went off, you had to either get behind a door, which was hard to do when the dog he would bite and release multiple times, or you would have to get him into a hold where he couldn't bite you and just hold him there until the demons had passed, which I got pretty good at. But I've still got scars up and down. I remember once we were out for a hike on the beach, and he found a semi-liquid dead seal, sort of half submerged in the sand. And he's in there chomping away at it. I'm like, he's going to eat that whole seal. He's going to be here all night. So I waded in, grabbed his collar, and he bit me multiple times as I pulled him away from that and inoculated me with dead seal. So he was really, really, despite the fact that I had done everything from birth as a professional baby dog trainer.
Yes, this is a really good time to interject something that I think is going to shock a lot of our listeners. It is not all in how they are raised.
Oh my God, it is so not.
It is not.
And I hate that phrase. It just, both because it works against dogs like my current dogs, who's from a fight bust. He grew up on a chain, and he's amazing. He loves everybody. And because some of us do everything we can and do everything right. And I did not abuse this dog. I did not beat this dog. He had nothing wrong with him. But the combination of prenatal starvation, sibling breeding, less than ideal later pregnancy with his mom still in the shelter. And, his mom was a fearful dog. She was telling all those puppies every time someone came over, run away, be scared. And several of the puppies had problems as well. So, so we put him on medication, which worked for a while until it didn't. And I ended up being trapped in my own house with my boyfriend on the couch and me in the office, and Chinook sort of going between the two of us. If anybody moved, he would lunge towards you and try to bite. So we yelled through the doors and made the decision to take him in and have him euthanized. And we already had an overdose of sedatives. We had muzzle trained him. And once he calmed down, we were able to get the muzzle on him and get him to the vet and have him put to sleep. And it was a really, really humbling experience. I did so much training with that dog. I did so much behavior modification. We worked so hard from birth, and I couldn't fix him. And I kind of think that the reason I went on and got a master's degree in animal behavior and have been working with all kinds of awesome trainers, that was actually 20 years ago last month that we put him to sleep. I think part of why I've been so obsessed with behavior has been trying to figure out what could I have done differently. And you know what? I don't think I could have. I don't think I could have fixed him even with what I know now.
It's hard to figure out how to follow that up because that's. And so now I feel like, do we just say, okay, Bernice, now what's your bad story?
I have a good story too. Hold on, it gets better.
Okay, yes, we need a good story, so please.
Okay, we'll do the good story now, and then we'll pass it over to Bernice. So while this was going on with Chinook, a young Doberman came into the shelter, and she was a stray, and she was not showing well in kennels, as many of the guarding breeds tend not to, because they yell and the person goes away, and they yell and the person goes away, and it gets worse and worse. So the shelter had decided to euthanize this dog for behavior, which, looking back on it, made total sense. But I still felt that I could fix everything. And I called Doberman Rescue and said, please, 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 can you take this dog? And it took a month because the city had to draw up a contract and all these waivers, and knowing that this dog has been showing aggression, you will give her 30 days of evaluation. And I kind of think she was my penance for not being able to fix Chinook, because she went to Doberman Rescue and she did her 30 days there. And I went to visit her once. And after I left, Kaylee with Doberman Rescue called me and she said, do not come and see this dog again unless you're going to adopt her, because she was really upset after you left. I did have her in my house for a couple of days before she went to Doberman Rescue, and she decided I was her person. So her name was Sarah, and 3 days after Chinook died, I was down in Washington signing papers to adopt Sarah. And I brought her home, and the difference between the two was that Chinook had so many triggers, and they were so shifting and subtle. And I remember once I set his bowl down and he exploded at me and then just stood over top of the bowl and peed right into his food. Like, I'd never had any trouble setting food down before or after that, but that one day it was food. Another time he attacked my boyfriend just for walking out onto the back porch. And all we could think of was that he'd gotten into some trash on that porch the day before. So you just never knew with him what was going to set him off, and he would do the same to our other dogs. But Sarah's triggers were very specific. She did not like men. She did not like certain types of handling, toenails, collar grabs, being removed from beds. She was a little bit guardy with her food, but she was very predictable. And the other thing that was different was Chinook would bite really hard. He would bite multiple times, going up your arm and then heading for your face. And they were the kind of bites that would leave deep punctures and deep black bruises that would take about 10 days to fade. Whereas Sarah would growl and air snap and not make contact. So although both of these dogs showed aggression, that type of abnormal aggression that Chinook was trying, that he was exhibiting, was so much harder to work with. Whereas with Sarah, I just put together behavior modification plans for the specific thing she was worried about. And it was touch her elbow, give her cheese, touch her wrist, give her cheese, touch her paw, give her cheese, pick up her paw, give her cheese, and work your way up to being able to cut those nails. And towards the end of her life, I could turn on the Dremel tool and she would come running from any room in the house, just like, oh my God, it's the cheese machine. So you can really change their mind to that extent if the triggers are specific and if the bite inhibition is good. And she had both of those, and she never did bite anybody in the 10 years I had her. And by the end of her life, she was able to compete in obedience and compete in agility, even with a male judge following her in the ring with no collar on in agility. So she was a great success story, and she was really nice penance, I felt, for not being able to fix Chinook.
I think we'll probably say this a couple times, but I think each case is so individual, and your individual case is a lot different with Sarah because of all of the experience that you have and the capability you had of managing Sarah and her issues and knowing what to do to work with it. So I think each case is going to be individual to the person and to the dog.
Yeah, and to the shelter. And that shelter was entirely right to want to euthanize her. They didn't have the personnel to do the behavior modification she needed. And would I take in a dog that difficult again right now, 20 years later? Hell no. Absolutely not. The 3 dogs I have now, one of whom is still a Doberman. She did hook me on Dobermans. They are the happiest, wiggliest, friendly dogs who coexist with all the other farm animals completely peacefully. I can have them in with the chickens and with the goats and with the horses and with the cats. Everybody gets along, and I've done my time with the difficult dogs, and I will not do it again. It was a great learning experience with Sarah, but I'm not taking that on again.
And it's very hard for a lot of people to have to take on something like that. And I don't think that the shelter should expect for their, regular everyday adopters to be able to manage something, to manage those behaviors.
Honestly, I mean, Sarah kept me single for a really long time, and I think
that could be good.
I don't know. I think she's the reason that I don't have children now, because that was my prime reproductive years, and I had a dog who was not entirely safe with men for quite a few of those years, and absolutely I wouldn't have her around kids, even with all of the work that I did. So I don't think that's a fair thing to inflict on people. I took it on knowingly, but I would absolutely not second guess a shelter that decided to euthanize a dog like Sarah now.
We've talked a little bit about the adoption side of it with the 2 dogs that you adopted. Bernice, do you have any sheltering examples that you want to share? I don't mean to put you on the spot with...
Yeah, you mean as far as the dogs still? We're still talking about behavior dogs? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have lots of them, but I'll keep it to 2 more recent and similar, what would appear to be similar dogs. We had a dog named Basil, Nikki, which you had known. Yes. And Basil actually did get adopted, so this is a happy story. And Basil had come from New York City Animal Care and Control. And what we were told when we took her in was that she was just shy, but that they were having trouble adopting her. But she was great with dogs. And so we figured we would give her a shot. Our environment is very different than New York City Animal Care and Control. But when she got to us, her behavior really escalated. She stayed excellent with dogs, big, small, male, female, didn't matter, which to me, with a dog that's got some human issues, is always a necessity if it's a shelter animal, because you have to have something to be able to work with. But she was severely aggressive towards strangers when she arrived here. So if she met you on the first day, you were her best friend. Everybody else was a stranger. She resource guarded her food and had handling issues. But what we discovered with her, another really good thing about her was her bite inhibition was beautiful. So she did tag a staff member one day who wasn't paying attention and reached to pick up her empty food bowl and didn't leave a mark. And that's huge. So we decided to start working with her on all of this stuff and just see, knowing that she may not make it. But she improved just constantly. The dog just, if you taught her something, she picked it up really nicely. And so we did working with her on touch so that we could eventually put the sticky note on a person's leg so she could go up and sniff the bottom of your leg. No hands in fearful dogs' faces. Just throwing that out there. So the really awesome thing that we learned about her was that once she met somebody in the right manner, you were in. So you could come back a week later and you were still in. So we were able to work her through most of the guarding and handling type stuff with just food. We found adopters that had 2 other dogs and were willing to work with her and actually follow instructions. And that's a really hard part because you can do all of this work and then somebody doesn't follow the instructions when the dog goes into a new environment and all of the behaviors come back again. But these people were actually wonderful, followed all of the instructions of go to your place when new people came in. And they have had 0 issues with this dog. And actually, one of their other dogs had passed away about a year later, and they came in and adopted another super dog friendly dog from us. So, and we made sure that he was super human friendly so that we didn't set her back. And so that was a really, really good one. But we recently had a dog that would appear to the average person to be the same as Basil. And I think that's always hard for volunteers. And I remember it being really hard for me when I started out. This particular dog had all the same behaviors, except that you could work with him all day. You would think that you made friends. And the next day, he would go after you again and you had to start all over. And so, and this went on for months. We worked with him for about 4 months. And he had a couple of people he liked, and he just could not get over it with some of the rest of us who had been there, 5 days a week for 4 months, doing these routines with him. He just couldn't do it. And then he started, even though he was dog friendly in the yard, he started to getting super reactive to dogs whenever there were people around. So if there were people around, he might actually tag another dog just because somebody showed up that he didn't know.
Wow.
So yeah, so he is one that we did have to let go because now we're going to have to place him in a home. Now, if he were somebody's personal pet and they wanted to continue to work on that, of course, we would obviously teach them management type things. But as a shelter dog, we had decided that this was a dog that we were not comfortable placing.
And he was a dog that was a really popular with our volunteers, right, Bernice?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
And I think we've seen this in multiple locations that we visited. We go out to shelters across the country, and we've seen dogs in facilities where we're like, why is this dog on the adoption floor? And it's a volunteer favorite.
Yeah. And we're lucky enough at Animal Farm. I have a very small group of volunteers and we're very honest with them. Mm-hmm. And so even though sometimes they may be upset, they never cause a stink. They never cause a problem. And they always ultimately understand. Mm-hmm. I will also answer any questions that they have, no matter what that question is. I'll answer those for them and help them through it. But when you have many, many more volunteers and many, many more personalities in the mix and everybody wanting to have their opinion heard, it gets a little bit complicated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this kind of segues into one of the main things that I think we want to talk about, which is the shame that people can inflict on shelter workers or individual dog owners because they euthanized an animal. And I've seen it happen online with volunteers who work at a shelter, say that this dog, and I've seen it happen several times, so I can't even think of one specific instance where they say, well, this dog, all the volunteers loved this dog, but the dog was euthanized. And so I think that goes in line with what you're talking about, Bernice. And then that creates a big, Trish, I know you've seen this and experienced this on social media. And I know Nikki and Bernice, you're not on social media as much, so you probably thankfully, miss out on all this joy.
Sadly, we don't, because we end up working with shelters who are suffering through it.
It's very hard. And, I mean, we don't know, me just being somebody who's just reading the comments and not knowing the situation, I don't know, but it's also important for volunteers and for people at home reading comments from volunteers that they understand that the volunteers really don't know everything that's going on behind the scenes.
And I think it's important for everybody listening to hear that nobody wants to euthanize a dog. There's not.
That's not why we went into sheltering.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Right. Quite the opposite.
It's a very hard decision for anybody to make, whether you're in sheltering or it's a family pet, especially that you have volunteers have great connections with dogs. They get to spend a lot of times with the dogs. But also, family dogs and the backlash that they sometimes, families receive when they're faced with making that decision is really difficult for them. And I think we all need to really take a step back and realize that nobody is making these decisions lightly.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note that every shelter situation is different too. Like, so for us, we were able to help Basil, but we're kind of privileged in that we have the staff to do that. I don't know that every shelter would have those resources to dedicate to a dog like Basil. They might not.
Right. And the tough part with a dog like Basil in a big busy shelter, she clearly was shut down because what they saw was sort of a shy, fearful dog without reactivity. So she would be a dog that might go home, and then you have people, when she comes back, you have folks that are angry at the adopters because they didn't see that behavior, and now these adopters are bad because they're returning this dog because they can't handle it.
Oh, I wish they would.
There's lots of sides.
And there was the same experience with the male dog you discussed, right, Bernice? That dog in the previous shelter reacted differently. Is that correct or no?
He was just quiet, but that was a shelter with 400 dogs in it, and he was living in a kennel with dogs, covered in urine, and we saw a totally different dog. He wasn't a super friendly, outgoing, woohoo dog. Like, he just seemed like a quieter kind of guy.
Yeah, there are behaviors that don't show up until the dog is in a home situation sometimes.
Right.
Like 3 weeks later, suddenly nobody can come in the door, and you won't see that in a shelter where he doesn't have the person to be attached to and the location that is home. And there's a few things feeding into this. I think one is the expectation that every dog can be rehabbed, which I blame some television trainers for, that everything can be fixed in 30 minutes or less. And that is absolutely not the way the real world works. And I also
you can't fix everything with an alpha roll. Are you serious?
You can't fix everything, period. It doesn't matter what situation you have. The thing I thought about with Chinook was, if he was a human going around stabbing people and dogs the way that he did with his teeth many times a day sometimes, he would be in jail, or he'd be in a psychiatric institution. He'd be somewhere where he would be safe. But he's a dog, and we don't have a place for dogs who are that dangerous. And I'm not sure that being chemically restrained in a psychiatric institution is a better life than the peace I gave him from his demons. I do not think he wanted to hurt me. I'm not sure where it came from, but 99% of the time he was a happy, friendly, bouncy with me. Really super trainable dog, really smart. Like across the board, I find a lot of these dogs are super smart. And he was the best trained dog I'd ever had, because he had to be, until he wasn't. So I think it's hard for people to reconcile the wonderful dog that you see in the shelter who's amazing with you and think, well, he's got to live in a home where it's not just one hermit coming back to the cave every night. It's like, even me, I'm kind of a hermit on the farm, but I have guys coming and working on the farm. I have occasionally friends come out to visit. I have I do have a family and nieces and nephews, and there is nobody who lives by themselves on a farm who likes wearing chainmail and getting bitten occasionally.
Yeah.
Which is the only home that Chinook could have gone to. And I think giving him peace from those demons was ultimately the kindest thing that I could do for him.
Yeah. We get those I hear that a lot from people calling in to the farm to see what their options are for their pet dogs, and they, I hear often he's or she is an excellent dog with me, but has bitten XYZ people. So it's really hard for them to make a decision when all they see is this great dog with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think sometimes people need permission as well.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes when people are reaching out, they're looking for someone to understand and actually give them permission to make the decision that they probably know in their heart is the right decision.
Yeah, it's a hard decision to make. Like in our society, we don't even kill animals for food anymore. It's a very rare person who doesn't just go to the supermarket and pick up a piece of meat or give up eating meat entirely. Like we're that removed from death. My mom was a social worker for a lot of years, and she never once had to go and say to a parent, listen, I'm really sorry, but Jimmy's going to have to go to the doctor and be put to sleep because we have no more options for his behavior. With humans, there are places to go, but with dogs, there is no psychiatric institution that we can put the Chinooks of the world into, and we do have to either keep them in a backyard and throw food out once in a while or put them to sleep. And I think the kinder thing, especially with a dog who is so clearly troubled, is to give them peace. Like I think that's a kindness.
And I want to make it clear because you've said this a couple times, Trish, but I know people do think that there's all these sanctuaries out there that take dogs in for free or it's something. And we talked about this, I think, on our rehoming podcast also, that these places are not as ubiquitous as people seem to think.
There are far, far, far more severely disturbed dogs than there are sanctuaries to take them, and far, far more disturbed dogs than there are good ethical sanctuaries. Because I worked for the ASPCA for 7.5 years, and I have seen what happens when sanctuaries go bad. And I will tell you, if you are taking your dog to a sanctuary, go there in person, look in all of the buildings, the ones in the back too. Go Google Spindletop.
Yep. I evaluated all of those dogs.
Go Google Olympic Animal Sanctuary. Go Google One More Chance in Ohio. I worked that one. These places that will take in your dogs. It's not a great model. Like there are a couple of good ones out there who have good funding, but they can't take all the dogs. And the model for sanctuary is often you bring me your dog, you give me $200 or $1,000 or $2,000, and I will keep this dog for the rest of its life. But the only way to keep money coming in is to take in more dogs. And if you have one person running the sanctuary and you have to keep taking in more and more and more to keep that place operational, that's not a good model. And I have seen that end really badly. So I'm not saying all sanctuaries are like that, but go see them, go look at them, go back every single year and look your dog in the eyeballs and make sure that they are still there and they're still okay, because I'm sure you guys have seen it too. There are horrific situations out there.
Yeah, it's not always the best option. And I think for me, coming in, working, I started at Animal Farm Foundation without any animal welfare background. So learning about how people make decisions to euthanize dogs and sheltering, and learning about, families that have to euthanize their dog was a whole new experience for me, because, I didn't see it often in my, everyday life outside of animal welfare. But one thing that really was an eye-opening thing for me was to try and realize what's the better option for the animal. because a lot of times the dog is suffering, is not living a happy life.
Yeah, I've seen their life get smaller and smaller and smaller, and the smaller their life gets, the more frustrated they get, and then you get these sort of shifting, spreading triggers for aggression because the dog's needs aren't being met, and it's just a sad situation. But and I think another thing that the other moment that really changed my mind on behavioral euthanasia was, again, that sort of 2 years in when I knew everything, and I was absolutely persuaded there was a lid for every pot. I think this was a little before Chinook. There's a dog who was returned for growling at a man, and I went in and I played with her, and she was fine with me. And I took her to the training center, and she was not fine with other dogs, but I thought, fine, I'll just get her an only dog home. And I persuaded some friends of mine who didn't have kids and didn't have pets. I says, please, please, please take Rosie in. She's a great dog. She's wonderful with me. And they did, and of course they fell for her and they adopted her, foster success. And then I promptly moved to San Francisco after the whole Chinook/Sarah event, and I was not able to give them any help with this dog. And it turned out she was not just a little iffy with other dogs, she was severely dog aggressive. She was also severely predatory. And in the 4 years that they had her, I heard the stories from John and Mindy that she had killed 3 of the neighbors' cats, one of them in full view of the neighbors. Might have been 2 of them. She had started going after kids. She had to be walked on a muzzle. And on her last day on this planet, and she had broken leashes and chewed John up, just trying to break her off other dogs, because as soon as she got loose, she was going to grab another dog and try to kill it. On her last day, the dog walker had her out without her muzzle on for some unknown reason, and a little cocker spaniel stuck his head under his gate and barked at her, and quick as a flash, she grabbed him by the head, pulled him under the gate with such force that the gate came off the hinges, shook him, and almost killed him. And John was just like, enough is enough, and took her to the vet and had her euthanized. And he's a professional writer, he wrote a really poignant letter to me and just said, I'm done with reject shelter dogs. I've done my duty to society. I'm looking at a litter of Vizsla puppies. And he went on, and I just think about all the people in those 4 years that John and Mindy talked to. They worked in the film business in Vancouver, and all the people who heard Rosie's stories. And I could have given them a dog like my pit bull Theodore now, who loves everybody. There are plenty of those. I could have sent them home with a really nice shelter dog who would have spent 12 years convincing all these Vancouver film people that shelter dogs were awesome. But instead they heard Rosie's stories. And, John bought the Vizsla, and damn it, he was a perfect dog. And he went to the beach with them. He went on vacations with them. They had a child. He raised their child. Like, he was the perfect dog. And I think about all the dogs who have died in shelters because of all the people that I convinced never to give a shelter dog a chance, because I placed one iffy one that I was personally attached to. So yay me. If I didn't know these people, I would have gone home and thought, yay, I saved a dog and gone on with my life. But because some of my early placements, and she was not the only one, were with personal friends of mine, and I got the long-term follow-up, and I saw what that dog did to that family and their friends. And just thinking about the repercussions of sending out one iffy dog when I could have given them a really nice dog, and I could have had a very different outcome. But I wasn't tough enough to euthanize a dog who was, a little iffy with other dogs, a little grumbly with men, whatever. We can place her. And I wrote that story up. It was published in Sheltering magazine. It's called The Perils of Placing Marginal Dogs, and I've recently updated it on the IAABC journal website. And it has changed a lot of people's minds. So Rosie did not die in vain, but boy, I wish I hadn't traumatized my friends like that.
Yeah.
I'm hoping to save people the learning curve I've been through by telling these stories. And I know that article has changed a lot of people's minds. I know shelters that just hand it out to new volunteers with, this is why we don't place dangerous dogs.
Yeah, and that's why that's one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast, though, too, is that we know people feel guilty. And then the public certainly makes them feel guilty. And, your story is one of the reasons why people shouldn't feel guilty. Making the best decision for not just that dog, but maybe all dogs and all people, the sheltering system, animal welfare in general. Some big picture stuff.
It's a learning curve for sure.
So I don't even know if this question can really be answered, or if we should even keep it in, but I have a dog, I don't know what to do. Like, what steps should I take to decide whether or not, and we can answer this question in two ways, probably one for personal dogs and one for animal shelters, because I think they're probably very different circumstances. But do you guys have any advice or experience about, how do I come to making that decision, and what are the things I should look at, and what things should I pay attention to, or is it such an individual circumstance that it really depends individually? I don't know if it's really something that can be quantified on this podcast, but I figured I'd go ahead and ask it.
Well, I think we've raised some of the points. I do think the bar has to be different for unowned dogs as opposed to owned dogs. Because if I have raised Chinook from a puppy and I really want to put everything I have into him, that's very different from asking people to take home a dog who's going to randomly attack them several times a day. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a big piece. And the other thing is, look at the home, because I do aggression seminars with Mike Shikashio, and he sort of contrasts like a dog who is level 3 or 4 biter might be okay in a home with somebody like me if their triggers are very specific, if they can be tightly managed around them. Whereas a dog who's just a level 2 biter, who is a severe resource guarder, steals things, guards toys, and is in a home with 5 small children, and the level 2 bites are 2 children's faces, like that dog's not safe in that home. So looking at whether to rehome or euthanize or work with is very much dependent on the family. But I think when you're looking at the really abnormal aggression, the ones with the shifting triggers, with the hard bites, I really think those are something that's organically wrong with their brain. And they tend to be, in my years of experience since then, a lot harder to work with. I don't know, Bernice, if you've seen differently.
Yeah, no, I agree. My experience, I actually got lucky because before I worked in sheltering, I actually started with Amy Martyr in the veterinary behavior clinic. So I got to see the families. Yeah, well, I got to see the families with the animals with behavior issues before I had those animals in front of me in a shelter. So I got a different experience than most people who start out with the sheltering stuff. So, and like you said, a bite to a child's face is very different than, a bite to an adult's hand, even if the bite is harder. So it's so hard because everything is so individual. But if the triggers aren't predictable, in my experience, most people, even if they start out wanting to work with the dog, they'll do it for a while, and ultimately you end up with the original decision to euthanize that animal, because you can't, every time you think you've made some level of a success, something else comes up, and no one that I know or have ever worked with can control every situation every time.
I'm looking back over the outline to see, I feel like we've missed a lot, but I think that's because it's such a loaded topic.
Yeah, I wanted to go in like a little bit about the no-kill.
Yeah, the keyboard warrior.
Yeah,
to be addressed too, because that's forcing a lot of shelters into keeping dogs for weeks, months, or years.
I think one thing, and so we at Animal Farm have the privilege of saying this, right? Because we don't rely on donors, so we don't really care what the public thinks that much. But I do think in a lot of ways, animal welfare workers just have to stop caring what the public thinks. If they know they're making the best decision for the dog, like they can't hold on to a dog or start outsourcing euthanasia to adopters because they're afraid of what the public may think of them. And I realize I'm saying this from a privileged perspective because my experience is totally different.
Well, there are scary people out there. There are people who threaten. There are people who picket the apartment buildings of the trainers who have had to make these tough decisions. I would love, I think just getting the word out that not everything is fixable is super important. But there are people who have serious problems with death. And maybe this is the time to talk about Lulu, because that's kind of launched a bit of a revolution.
Yes, please talk about that.
So I'm on the board of directors of a really awesome bully breed rescue, or mostly bully breed rescue, called Bully Project NYC, run by Jennifer Bristol. And she and I are...
Yep, she's a great friend of Animal Farm.
She's awesome. Yeah. She was the subject of my first shelter consult ever many years ago, and we've stayed in touch ever since. And we've had many conversations about behavioral euthanasia. So she allows me to do Bully Project South, where I occasionally bring in a dog that I like, foster them, fix them up, and rehome them around where I live here in North Carolina. And I've got a pretty good record. I'm pretty good at picking nice dogs. So I was doing some consulting at a shelter in a BSL town. And I thought, well, I'm driving home. I am not leaving this town without a bully breed of some sort. So I had picked one out when I was in playgroups. I found this nice young female who was friendly with every single dog. And they said, do you want me to put her on hold for you? I said, no. If she gets adopted, that's great. But I think I'm going to take her home. So, of course, she gets adopted minutes before I'm ready to leave town. So I'm walking through the kennels trying to remember who did what in playgroup. And a kennel worker came up and said, oh, you've got to meet this dog. She is so amazing. And she shows me this dog who had clearly recently had puppies, and she's just lying sad in a little tiny shoreline cage in the corner. And, shelter workers know what a good dog is. So I took her out and I walked her around, and she was kissing me and sort of pulling towards the humans and trying to kiss children. I thought, well, this is great. She's very people social. And I took her around back to see some of the dogs in the outside play areas, and she went up and sniffed them. And I thought, well, she doesn't seem bad with dogs. She's had a litter of puppies. I am biased to think that dogs who've had a litter of puppies are often good with other dogs because they've recently been around a lot of them. So I took her back to my hotel, and I walked her in the door, and Theodore was, or actually we met outside in the parking lot. And as soon as she saw Theodore unleashed, she went, "Arr!" And Theodore's my bite bust dog who loves everybody. And I thought, oh crap, have I just made a bad mistake? I'm already 4 hours out of town. I met my assistant who had brought Theodore down to do a aggression in dogs seminar partway between where I was consulting and home. And so I put Lulu in the X-Pen and thought, well, we'll just take this a little slowly. I can't believe she's that bad. And we slowly introduced her to Theodore and brought her home, and she was coughing, so I kept her in quarantine in the dining room and slowly introduced her to my other dogs. And it seemed like she was all right with a slow introduction. I thought, well, that's okay. And Bully Project accepted her, and we had her in our care for about 10 months. I ended up getting divorced, moving into a tiny house that's 160 square feet, and I foisted her on my friend Pia, who fostered her on and off. We adopted her out twice, and she bounced back both times, no fault of her own. And we were still marketing her heavily, and she stayed. She came back to stay with me over Christmas, just last Christmas. And it's a little crowded in the house. Okay, there's 3 dogs, 2 cats, and me in 160 square feet. But finally, Theodore got her playing, and I thought, holy moly, this is such a breakthrough for this dog who'd always been standoffish, but not aggressive. We've unlocked the door. We can maybe place her in a home with another dog, and this is wonderful. But she started fixating a little bit on my older dog, and I thought, I got to go away for a couple of days. The pet sitter came in. I said, you've got Lulu and Theo and Maggie, and I'm going to just take Lily, my smaller dog, with me because Lulu's just been a little weird with her. And I came back late at night, a couple days later, and as soon as Lily walked into the house, Lulu just grabbed her by the face and started shaking her. And luckily, my assistant was still there, Kat Ross. She's an awesome handler, knows how to break up a dog fight. She hops on top of Lulu, sprays her with water from the kitchen sink, which has zero effect. And she's stabilizing her head so she won't keep shaking and damaging my little dog, who's, trying to get loose and trying to bite her back at the same time. So luckily I had a brake stick in the car. I ran out to the car, got the brake stick. We got them separated. It felt like an hour, but it was probably 2 minutes. And in that time, she did $700 worth of damage to my little dog's face. And I think if there hadn't been two dog trainers and a brake stick in the house at that point, I do think she would have killed her. So the rule with Bully Project is dogs with offensive aggression towards humans or dogs will not be adopted out. So I knew immediately what her fate was going to be. So I called Jen as we were driving the two dogs to the emergency vet. This is New Year's Eve, of course, in separate cars. And I called the emergency vet to say, do you do behavioral euthanasia? Because I've got nowhere to keep her in this 160 square foot tiny house overnight. And the next day is New Year's Day. It's not going to be any easier. And I needed to get Lily stitched back up. So luckily, Jen's called in a credit card to the emergency vet. And we arrived there separately. They stitched Lily up and they put Lulu to sleep right then and there. And, Kat and I went back and forth over what to do because Theodore has a web page with 20,000 friends, Pibbling with Theodore. It's a fun page. He invented the word pibbling. And we didn't have
I didn't know that. I didn't know.
Well,
I didn't know that's where it came from.
I'm not sure. He's popularized it.
Yeah, he is.
It's an Urban Dictionary, so it exists now. Go look it up. Anyways, I had been heavily marketing Lulu on his page for 10 months at this point. And Kat and I went back and forth like, should we say anything? Because in the past, Bully Project has euthanized dogs, and we tend to just quietly remove them from the webpage and let people assume that they've been adopted and not get into it with the keyboard warriors, which is what a lot of groups do, which unfortunately makes people think that all dogs are fixed. All of them got placed, and that's not true.
Right.
And Kat said, yeah, that's what you should do for sure. You don't want to deal with it. And I waited 3 or 4 days before I said anything on either of my pages. And I'm just such a bad liar. And people were asking, where's Lulu's? And more Lulu pictures. Because I'd posted all these pictures of her playing with Theodore at last. And I finally just came clean. And on my personal page, it was nothing but support. But on Theodore's page, which is a more random sample of pit bull lovers, I did get some really offensive comments. Just, I should have kept her for life and just crated and rotated. And I got called all kinds of names. And, I can take it. I've been in animal welfare for a long time. I don't know these people. I don't care what they think. But this is something that happens to regular people who euthanize their dogs for behavior too, which, causes a lot of people to just lie about it. Oh, he had a seizure. We had to put him down. Or it was cancer, or I gave him to a farm. But this amazing thing has happened. My friend Sue Alexander in Canada shot me an email, and she said, we need a place for people to talk about behavioral euthanasia. You're not alone. I've been through it. Lots of people have been through it. And there is no place where you can get support. And I just said, yeah, of course, that's great. We do need that. And went about my day, and later on that day, Sue sends me a link to a group that she has started that says, Losing Lulu. And I thought, okay, great, signed up for it. And that it has just been this phenomenon. It has blown up since January 4th when it was started. We now have 2,000 members worldwide. And there's so many people who have been just stifling the pain of having had to do a behavioral euthanasia and having been judged for it and having just all of these emotions. Like, you have grief, but you also have relief. Like, I remember the first time I had friends over after Chinook was dead, I was like, I shouldn't be able to do this. I haven't been able to do this for 18 months, but I'm sad that he's gone, but my life can go back to normal. So there's these strange things that happen around a behavioral euthanasia that don't really happen when it's an old dog that dies. So it's been a really wonderful and healing place. We have 3 screening questions that everybody needs to answer. We have 0 tolerance for bullying or second guessing. We do not talk about dogs who are still alive because it's too much of a burden for people to try to make decisions on other people's dogs. Like, if only I had done that. So we absolutely don't allow any of that. But we do have some people on it who are thinking about euthanasia. They just have to agree not to ask specific questions about their dog. But they're welcome to read everybody else's stories. And it's one of the most caring and wonderful places on the internet. And we do police it very strictly. There is no... Occasionally somebody will slip by the guards at the gate, and we block and delete, and we do not allow any second guessing or any armchair quarterbacking. And it's been wonderful. There's people who euthanized a dog decades ago who are still feeling pain about it, who are able to read these stories of other people's behavioral euthanasias and find some peace. So it's been just amazing.
Other than joining the group, do you have advice for people who, either shelter workers or individuals who've had to euthanize their family dog, for dealing with, I really don't like the term keyboard warriors, but I don't know what else to say other than that. So for dealing with that kind of backlash.
Yeah, I am not sure. I have this vision of this posse of Losing Lulu people who will just descend with love and support and help out people whenever this happens, and just drown out the naysayers. But I know even the handful of naysayers, they're still at the back of my mind. And I've been through this a lot. This is not my first rodeo.
And the comments you got with Lulu were so terrible. I mean, you and I already, like, we don't even really know each other that well, but I know you posted some of them, and I was so mad. I was like, I want these people's addresses so I can go to their. I was so angry.
Like, they don't know me. They just assume that I'm some kind of. And Lulu was a bully breed. She was she looked like she had a lot of English bulldog in her as well. So, people are assuming that I just hate pit bulls because I had one euthanized, and it's like, no, you don't even know me. You have no idea the work Theodore does for pit bulls every single day. It's, and I think these people are just very troubled themselves. I think people who have that sort of extreme reaction to death have their own issues, and I don't think fighting, like, the worst one was like, please block and delete me, and then blah, 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 more venom. And so I gave her wish, because there's no point arguing with people who have that much of an issue. Like, there's something else going on in there. But yeah, I wish I had an answer. I say, surround yourself with friends, block and delete the naysayers. But I think a lot of it is we need to talk about this. We need to let people know that there are these dogs out there who can't be fixed, and that's okay. That's sometimes behavioral euthanasia is the kindest thing you can do for a really troubled soul.
Yeah, and I think an important thing to remember for shelter folk is that when we keep dogs like that, we're not only letting that dog suffer, but the dogs that can't make it to the floor, who may not have those issues. And those dogs are often being euthanized, especially if you're in a crowded southern shelter. So we're keeping this dog with all of these issues, who's clearly uncomfortable himself, alive, while other animals in the back are dying.
Well, even if you're a limited intake shelter, if you take in one dog with severe problems who stays with you for 2 years until you either find that hermit, outsource the behavioral euthanasia, or bite the bullet and euthanize them yourself, if your average length of stay is 14 days, that is 20. So that's 50 dogs that could have been placed that could have gone through that kennel that you did not pull from the shelters surrounding you so that you could keep the staff favorite.
Right.
And also looking at the money, like the average cost of care per day is $25 per dog per day. And I hate for it to come down to dollars and cents, but if it costs you $9,000 a year, you have just put $18,000 just in food and staff time to care for that dog. And think about how many spay neuters that is. Think about how many training classes that is. Think about all of the outreach you could do, all of the dogs you could save with $18,000 that you're spending to keep a really difficult dog so that you don't get backlash from social media, so that your volunteers don't all leave. I think we need to be open and transparent. When I was director of animal behavior at the ASPCA shelter, I was like Bernice. I would talk to anybody for as long as they wanted to hear me talk, as you can tell. And I have this arsenal of stories of what happens when we place these dogs. Because we'd get young people coming in as animal care attendants, and they didn't think they'd ever have to euthanize a dog they loved. And these dogs love them more than anyone in the shelter. They're the ones who walk them, who feed them, who bring them toys, who clean them. And I've spent a lot of time talking to very young people who have started their career in animal sheltering, and I've been able to change a lot of minds. And if we made a decision for behavioral euthanasia, it was never done lightly. It was done with a committee. There was a bunch of managers. I would bring forward that if we had a dog for euthanasia, I would show video if necessary. And we would write a memo that would be placed in an area where people could either choose to see it or not see it, depending on what was easier for them. And before the euthanasia, we would book the training room for an hour, and they could come down and they could feed that dog hamburgers, they could feed them chocolate, they could do whatever they wanted. They could throw a ball, and they could be there for the euthanasia if they wanted to. And I tried to go to everyone I could. I didn't want it to ever be a snap decision or an easy decision for me. I can hold off a front vein. I can hold off a back vein. I learned a lot of the defensive handling that I'm teaching now working with these dogs. But and it was really often just the shelter veterinarian and myself, because I tried to make these calls sooner rather than later once I saw the dog was dangerous. But I think being open and transparent, and anybody could come and talk to me if they were having trouble with a decision, and I would show them the video I would try to get video of the behavior, because it was often in context that the shelter staff wouldn't see.
Now, you mentioned outsourcing euthanasia a little bit. I know that's something that we wanted to talk about. I have experience with people that call us to say, they have a dog, the dog, has bitten somebody or whatever it may be, and they want to give the dog to the shelter. So I've had experience with that where, sometimes you need to say, well, the dog is probably better off if the end result is going to be euthanasia is with the people that the dog knows well, and not have to go to a shelter and then, have to go through that stressful experience and then be euthanized. But there is the opposite, Regina, and I know you wanted to talk about the opposite end of that, which I don't really have experience with, but I thought maybe you...
The opposite end of that, you mean, I think we did touch on that. You mean shelters adopting...
dangerous dogs.
Not euthanizing dogs and adopting out dangerous dogs. Yeah. I think we did touch on that.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that's what I did with Rosie, essentially, was I outsourced her euthanasia to my friends, and it should have been me. I should have been tough enough to do that. But I'm seeing this more and more where shelters know that a dog is dangerous. They will look for that hermit living on a farm and adopt the dog out and cross their fingers. And I can tell you, if you read Losing Lulu, that these dogs are doing a lot of damage to the people that they are being adopted to. They are getting their pets killed. They are getting their neighbors' pets killed. They are getting friends and neighbors bitten. They are getting bitten themselves, and the dog still ends up dead, but you have traumatized a family, and everybody that family knows whenever you outsource euthanasia to your adopters.
And I think people don't realize that's what they're doing. Of course, I don't think anybody thinks, I'm going to place this dog with this family and then I don't care what happens. I mean, I think everybody's genuinely hoping for the best, and believes that it will work because they want to believe that it will work so badly.
And they might not be doing the follow-up to know that this is what's happening with their dangerous dogs. They might be just blithely going on with life like I would have if I had adopted Rosie to a stranger and not knowing what these dogs are doing.
Yeah. And this is my own personal opinion, is that with a country so focused now on their live release numbers, we start to stop looking at the dogs individually and start worrying more about what dogs are exiting our shelter to get our numbers up.
Yeah, that whole like 90% is no kill. It's such an artificial number. Like if my shelter just took in 300 hoarding dogs with genetic aggression issues, and it may not be 90% for that month, and that if I'm still making the best decision for each of those dogs, then I am not a bad person. I did some shelter consulting with Dr. Cynthia Karsten a few years ago, and she just blew my mind. She's always blowing my mind. And she said, if we lived in a perfectly humane society, if we had fixed all of the issues with landlords, with allowing people to rehome their own dogs, with pets who have medical problems, there's a support network to take care of them. When we get to that point, I'm not going to say if, I'm going to say when.
Yes.
Guess what the euthanasia rate is going to be in shelters? And if you're doing everything right, it should be close to 100%, because only the very sick and the very dangerous dogs are going to end up in a shelter. You'll have safety nets for everybody else. And that just made my head explode. I'm like, yeah, you're right. 90%, it's a nice number, but if we're doing things right, it may have to become 80% and 70% and 50%. And then why are we even looking at numbers? Like, let's just do things right. Let's do the best we can for every animal who needs it in our community and try to keep them out of the shelters when we can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to point out too, since we're on the subject of like outsourcing euthanasia too, that a lot of people will see a listing for a dog on social media or maybe on Pet Finder, and maybe it says that there is a problem with the dog has a bite history, and then people have a savior complex of, I'm gonna save that dog and I'm gonna adopt that dog, or I'm gonna convince a rescue to take that dog if the dog is rescue only, and then I'm gonna foster that dog. And they have no experience with dogs really, other than looking at them on Facebook. And I really want people to know that, I don't know, just don't do that.
Well, shelters don't tend to make these decisions lightly. So,
right.
Yeah, if the dog is rescue only, I'm not sure why we think rescues are better suited to deal with these difficult dogs.
I have seen this specific thing happen, and that's why I'm bringing it up.
Oh, we all have.
This one person on Facebook was like, I'm going to take that spicy dog. She called this dog Spicy. It had bitten 3 people before.
Yeah.
And she found a rescue to pull the dog, and I don't know what happened. I didn't, follow up, but like, this dog wasn't spicy. Yeah. That's not the word I would use to describe this dog.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of us have this sort of savior complex, and I certainly did in my early days as well. Like, only I can fix this problem. And you get humbled. The universe sends you the dogs you need. And I think any of us who do this for long enough will come to very similar conclusions at the end. But yeah, a lot of the Lulu people our members have taken on dogs where the mean old shelter wanted to kill them, and I'm going to just take that dog in, and he's just misunderstood. And a lot of us have learned the hard way that not everything.
Yeah, it's a really hard, tragic way to learn.
Yeah. And not to sound cold, but your average everyday adopter, they don't want those behavior problems,
Yeah, even if a lot of us have euthanized our foster dogs because, like, think about Lulu. Like, what home would she be safe in now that I know she's got such a hard bite? If I sent her to a home with no other pets, and it's a farm, and it's in the country, and like, farms have neighbors with dogs. If Aunt May shows up at your front door, over the holidays with her Pomeranian in her arms. Like, if a dropped leash or a unlatched gate means somebody else's pet is dead or mauled or somebody's kid is hurt, I just don't think we should be sending those dogs out. I think it is our duty as shelter people to spoil them stinking rotten and let them go.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So that was a really tough topic, but I'm glad that we discussed it. I think everybody needs to hear it. I think the more that we talk about this stuff, the better and easier it's going to get for people to make, these really tough decisions, and for the people on the outside to understand why shelters make these decisions and why family make these decisions, and understand it better, and not judge people for something that they shouldn't be judged for.
If you have not walked a mile in their shoes, you should not be judging people for making these decisions. And if you have walked a mile in their shoes, you will not be judging people for making these decisions.
Yes. Very well said.
Yeah, it's a heavy topic, but I am really grateful that a voice as big as Animal Farm Foundation is tackling this head on. It's just so important to talk about. There's so many people suffering for decisions they've made, whether they're shelter people or individuals who've taken on these dogs. Some of the people on Losing Lulu, there's a veterinary behaviorist who bought a purebred dog from a breeder, like met the parents and did everything right, and still ended up with a very dangerous dog that she had to euthanize. And I think that's one thing that's been really reassuring to a lot of the civilians who come to Losing Lulu is there are so many trainers on there, and a lot of us have stories like this, and a lot of us really haven't talked about it much in public. But having the support of the group and having all these people and realizing that you're not alone has really brought this topic out of the dark a little bit. It's sort of peeking its way out of the dark, and we need to keep talking about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely, because I think people have the assumption too that like you said, that the way people attacked you, that you were heartless, as if you weren't carrying your own grief over it.
Yeah, I mean to be attacked in public on the worst day of your life, where you have, like, I didn't go into rescue so that I could euthanize dogs.
Right.
When you've had to make that tough call, the toughest call that you can make as an animal lover, really, and then to get attacked if you dare to say anything about it in public, and staying in the dark just keeps the cycle going, where people think, well, all dogs can be saved because nobody ever talks about euthanizing them. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we need to keep the conversation going. So I'm really glad you guys are tackling this. And
me too.
Trish, thank you so much for being brave with us and taking on this conversation.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It's a conversation we need to be having.
Thanks, guys.
Alrighty.